Okay, welcome to our class today. I hope that you are all safely inside with this strong rain today and that you are keeping warm. Today, we are going to be reviewing your second and third reading assessments. And the reason for this is because you are going to be returning to these two articles when you write an essay at the end of the semester. So it's very important that we are all on board about what these authors mean in their two articles. And we also need to make sure that you fully understand what the answers for the worksheets were. Of course, the answers that are provided with the model answers are not the only answers for those questions, but they are simply a guide for you so that you can see how those questions could be answered fully. Okay, we're going to also look at a number of issues that have arisen with these worksheets or these questions so that I can help you to see how to put bibliographies together, because I see that that is a major problem. And then also how to do citations. Some of you are doing citations very nicely in your worksheets already, but I want to go through that carefully again so that I can show you how to do it more effectively if you haven't been doing it already. All right, so let's begin by first looking at the tasks that are ahead for you at the end of the semester. So I'm going to share with you what is up on Moodle. You can download this on Moodle. So these are the reading assignments that you've already been doing. I want to look at this essay assessment over here at the end. The requirement is to write a 2-page essay on the changing gendered nature of iskatamia. Let's think about that carefully, because in the two papers that we have been reading, one by Gunnar and one by Ndlovu, have different feelings about the representation of maleness or masculinity. Okay, so that's what this is about. Gendered, you know, if you talk about what is your gender, the question is, are you a male or are you a female, right? So this 2-page essay is about how iskatamia has been changing, how its representation or how it shows masculinity has been changing. End of the third reading assignment, I asked you a question about of the two readings that you had done was written first. Was it Ndlovu's or was it Gunnar's? If that is correct, you will have known that it was Ndlovu in 1906, whereas Gunnar wrote hers in 2014, which is quite a lot later than that, almost 20 years afterwards. So what we see in the two different papers are different versions of the same genre, but how it's been changing over the last 20 years. And of course, 1996, if you think about it, was 2 years after our first democratic election. So we were very new into democratic South Africa. 2014 was already 20 years into that. And so people have different feelings about what iskatamia is and how it's changed in relation to that. So we'll also talk about those things. So the question says, review the two sources on iskatamia which you read for the reading assessments 2 and 3. For this project, you must use these two sources. Remember to cite the sources and include a bibliography. You may use other scholarly sources if you wish, as long as you include them in the bibliography and cite them correctly. So the meaning of this question is that you have to use those two articles that we have read, the one by Gunnar and the one by Ndlovu. Okay, and that you have to do a bibliography and you have to use citations. This next bit here is optional. You may use other scholarly sources, but you don't have to. You do have to use the two that we have been reading, but you can add some others if you wish. Okay? Then the essay must have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. And in the next few weeks, we're going to be speaking about how to write an introduction, how to write a conclusion, how to structure the body of an essay. Okay? Then it says, write the essay in formal tone, paying special attention to grammar and punctuation. Each paragraph of the body must begin with a topic sentence. And we'll talk about what a topic sentence is in the next few weeks as well. Do you see, many of you who have had feedback from me, you will have seen that I paid a lot of attention to your grammar and punctuation. Okay? Either by correcting it so that you could see where the corrections were, or writing a note for you to say, please use punctuation correctly, or please use capital letters correctly, and so on. Okay. Remember, you are writing formally for a university. You're not writing an SMS. You're not writing a WhatsApp message. You're writing a formal assignment. That means that the first letter of every sentence must be a capital letter. And at the end of a sentence, you must have a full stop. In this essay, at the end of the semester, if you don't do those things, I will take marks off. That is for sure, because this is meant to be a course teaching you these conventions. So if you don't do them at the end of the semester, you will lose marks. Okay, so make sure that you are doing these things already so that they don't catch you at the end of the semester. Whenever you write at university, you are expected to write in formal tone, not with small letters all the way through. You must have a capital letter at the beginning of every sentence, and you must end a sentence with a full stop. That's a given. If you don't do that from now on, you will lose marks for it. Okay, so please be aware of that. The other thing is, many of you are writing long, long sentences, and you use a comma as though it is a full stop. So you'll write a long, long sentence, then you put a comma and you continue and you continue, and your sentence can go on for 4 or 5 lines. Sentences need only be 1 line long, or maybe at maximum 2 lines long. Remember how we structured sentences in the first semester? A sentence has a subject, a verb, and an object. And then you can add things around those 3 requirements of the sentence if necessary. Many of you are not doing that. You are adding sentences with multiple subjects and multiple objects. And as soon as you start doing that, the sentence becomes too complex and too difficult to understand. Okay, so I really challenge you on this one. Remember that formula: subject, verb, object. If you can't remember it, go back and revise your notes to ensure that you are doing this correctly. If you want to practice doing that kind of thing, I will be happy to look at any of the work that you want to write out for me to see if you are improving. I'm quite happy to look at any work that you do over and above the work that is set here to improve your English. And if you want exercises to improve your English and your English writing, all you need to do is to tell me and I will organize to do that for you. Okay. So now you'll see why we are doing today's class. We are doing today's class to prepare you for this essay assessment. Okay. Now, let's consider those 2 articles. And now what I'm asking for is for you to speak to me now. So don't keep quiet at this point. If you do keep quiet, I'm going to ask specific people to give me an answer. I want you to tell me about these 2 articles. Let's start with the one by Liz Gunner. And I want you to tell me about the author Liz Gunner. I want you to tell me what racial group she comes from or what ethnicity she is. I want you to tell me if she is Zulu or not. And I want you to tell me how she got the information for her research article that you read. Okay, I want to hear those three things. Please, can you give me feedback about those three things? Anybody can start?
Liz Ghana, she's a white person. Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So she carried the information or like collecting these books, she read books and do
Interviews. Yes.
Yes,
That's correct. Yeah. So she did interviews. She read a lot of books beforehand. When you read her article, you see that she quotes people that she's been speaking to, and she quotes the lyrics of their songs, which means that she was actually present when she was listening to the songs and that she wrote the text down. Okay. Now, Liz Gunner is an interesting lady. She actually used to work at UKZN. She's retired now. Okay. And she speaks Zulu and understands Zulu fluently. So even though she's providing English translations, and she's checked those translations with a mother tongue Zulu speaker, she is understanding what she's hearing when she goes to and listens to an Eskratamia concert. But also, she's been attending Eskratamia concerts and performances and competitions for about 30 or 40 years. So the people who are involved in these competitions know her well. They often think of her and consider her as a friend. Okay, so Liz Gunner is a white lady who used to work at UKZN. So she was an academic, a lecturer, and she wrote a lot about Zulu culture. Now, I want you to consider this, okay? When you are somebody who is not Zulu culturally, that means you didn't grow up in the Zulu culture. What do you think are the advantages when you look at Zulu culture? What are the things that you are going to see about that culture that somebody who is inside that culture is not going to see? Think about yourself. When you see somebody or when you encounter somebody from a different culture, which is, let's say you are Zulu and you are looking at a different culture, what are the things that you notice about that other culture when you first encounter it?
The way they dress and the way they look things.
Yes.
Different way.
The way that they dress, the way that they look. Correct. What else? Here's a hint. We often notice things like what people wear and what people look like and what people eat in different cultures because it is different from what we do. Okay? So one of the advantages of looking at another culture when you are not part of that culture is you notice things that are not the same as what you do. When you notice things that are not the same as your own culture, often you ask yourself, why do they do that? Why do they do that? Have you ever found yourself asking that? Let's say you meet somebody, a Xhosa person or a Sotho person or an English person, and they do something differently to what you do. And you say, why do they do that? Have you ever had that experience?
Yes.
Okay. I think many of us naturally do that. We are interested by what is different. And I don't mean interested necessarily in a positive or a negative sense, because sometimes we are interested in people who are different from us because we do not like what they do. At other times, we are interested in people's differences because we do like what they do. Okay, so I'm not talking about interest from any perspective necessarily, but that we find differences interesting. Now, in academic writing, we talk about people from another culture as the other. Okay, so let's say I am from the English culture of South Africa, and I look at the Zulu culture. When I look at the Zulu culture, I consider it something other because I didn't grow up in that culture. I don't know what all of its customs are. I don't know what all of its idioms, when you are speaking in idiomatic language, are. I don't know what all of the jokes are. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but if you are somebody who is from a different part of the same country or the same area, they might speak the same language, but when they tell jokes, you realize that you don't understand what the jokes are about because they know something that you don't know, okay? So all of these things help us to see people as others. And that is sometimes a good thing and sometimes a bad thing. Usually for human beings, when we talk about other people or they did this, it's in a negative sense, but it doesn't have to be like that. And one of the nice things about Liz Gunner is that she comes to Zulu culture with a deep respect for it and a deep love of it, even though that she is an outsider. So she's commenting on Zuluness, but from a very positive sense. Okay, so she's not looking at it as a negative sense, but from a positive sense. You can get other people who look at Zulu culture from a very negative sense, and you would get a very different kind of article on Isicathamiya if we were looking at it from that perspective. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, sir, it does.
And for the rest of you, thanks, Tamia.
Yes.
Okay. So what do you think are the possible disadvantages of being an outsider when you look at another culture? So let's consider Liz Gunner. What do you think are the disadvantages of being a white person examining Zulu culture? See if you can think what they would be.
So wouldn't it be like you said, being that outsider, not understanding, not fitting in because you don't understand what their lingo or what they do, so you just be that outsider.
Okay, so in other words, not understanding the kind of symbols that they use and what those symbols might mean. Also,
Yes, sir.
you might not even understand their language, in which case you are always relying on somebody who is an insider to translate for you. Am I?
Yes.
What you?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, good. Mlungisi, you wanted to say something?
I see.
You wanted to say something similar. Okay. So one of the main disadvantages of being an outsider is that almost always you have to have somebody who is an insider to translate for you. And I don't always mean that they have to translate Zulu to English, for example, but they may also need to translate for you why people do things the way that they do. Okay. So if somebody hasn't grown up as a Zulu, they might not understand what a particular way of speaking to somebody would imply. Okay, now I'll give you an example. Often in white culture, if you don't look somebody in the eye when you are talking to them, it is considered disrespectful. So if you look down when somebody is speaking directly to you, it is considered to be disrespectful. In many South African cultures, though, to look somebody directly in the eye, especially if they are older than you, is considered extremely disrespectful. So we have two cultures, one where looking in the eye is respectful, the other where looking in the eye is disrespectful. Okay? So somebody from the outside perspective may do something that is incredibly disrespectful without even realizing that they're doing it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. You may have heard sometimes, I think people are a little bit more sensitive about it now than they used to be, or aware of it. But often white people would complain that Black people do not look them in the eye. The other side is true. Black people would complain that white people look them in the eye all the time and they found it very rude. Okay. So sometimes we have to be very much aware of the way that we deal with people. So imagine now Liz Gunner, who is a white lady, a white female, and she is looking at Iskatamia, which is it sung by females at all?
No.
Nope.
No, it's sung by men. Now, Zulu men are very, very protective of their identity. Okay, can you imagine if a white lady comes to do research on what is a Zulu male genre? There's one of the big disadvantages of being an outsider, but also being an outsider who is from the opposite sex. If she's looking at something where, let's say, she was looking at amakwaya, which is like a choral type of music where men and women sing together, okay? Then it wouldn't be quite so problematic because there's more equality there with men and women. But this is something very different. What do you think might be some of the problems from the Zulu men's perspective to seeing a white woman coming to examine and do research on this particular type of music? Try to think hard, be creative about the way that you think about what could be the problems. I can wait for a very long time, I assure you.
So I don't know, it could be
I think-
seen as disrespectful probably, or even threatening, because this is now a female, not Zulu. They could take it as her being, I don't know, oppressive in a way, trying to break their traditions, so forth.
Thank you. Yes, I'm sure that's true. Mlungisi, you want to say something? Thank you, Tamir.
See, I think from the past interaction between Black people and white people would cause the males or the Black people who she is trying to interview to be more protective of the information, to not let her, know too much. of the sensitive information. Yeah, so I think something like that.
Yes, I think you're right. Do you remember a film? Now, I can't remember exactly what it was called. It came out about 2 or 3 years ago. It was about the Xhosa initiation ritual. I don't know if any of you ever saw it. It was very, very controversial when it came out because it put in a movie what was happening or what happens at a Xhosa circumcision rite and the kind of things that go on there, which are considered to be extremely sensitive, culturally, and only the domain of men. Okay. Now, occasionally, when researchers are working or interested in a topic, even if they're from the same culture, they may create problems of understanding or misunderstanding. One of the things that can happen when white people observe Black people in their in cultural sense is that those who are in the Black culture give information to the white person that they think the white person wants to hear. And the other way can happen as well. Let's say there is a Black person who wants to do research on white culture. The white person may give answers that they think the Black person wants to hear. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the disadvantages that Liz Gunner faces is, as a white female, she's up against a huge cultural barrier where there is the issue of apartheid, of which she was a beneficiary because she's an older white lady, even though she worked against apartheid, and even though she is fluent in Zulu and all of those kind of things. That is beside the point. The fact that she has a white skin already puts her on a different, puts her in a category in many people's minds, okay? So she's already working against that. So that's one thing. The second thing is that she is a female in what is predominantly a male environment. And in a male environment, which is not always hostile, but certainly dismissive sometimes of women, okay? Now, that's not just a Zulu attribute, it's a South African attribute as well, because it happens in a lot of white culture too, where women are just sidelined because they are women, okay? It's where gender-based violence and all of that emerges. And it's certainly not just one particular culture in South Africa, it's all of the cultures of South Africa, which are very much influenced by what is called patriarchy. That means dominated by men, okay? So that she's a female coming into an exclusively male domain is also problematic, okay? Then we have some other issues which she would face. She is an outsider from a cultural perspective, so she may not be able to see all of the cultural symbols which somebody like Caesar Ndlovu would see. So somebody like Ndlovu sees the idea of war dances coming into Estratamia, okay? Liz Gunner doesn't look at that at all. She looks at it from a soft masculinity perspective, mainly to do with the texts that they sing, the words that they are singing, okay? And the dances she looks at a little bit as influence from the tap dancing of the Americans. But Ndlovu looks at that side of Estratamia much more deeply than Liz Gunner does, okay? So he's looking at the movement from the perspective of what the movement symbolizes or symbolized, okay? Even if it symbolized war in the past, it doesn't maybe symbolize war anymore, but it certainly has the connection of masculine, strong, warlike, violent, okay? She's looking at Estratamia from the American influence of tap dancing. When we showed you that video on tap dancing, you'll remember it's like dancing with a lot of footwork, okay? It's not violent in any way. But that doesn't mean that both of them aren't correct. You will have noticed that I asked the question at the end of that last reading assessment. Which author is correct? Is Estratamia very much embedded in Zulu culture and Zulu custom? Or is it more to do with or the violent side of masculinity? Or is it more to do with soft masculinity, which is much more tempered? And many of you told me that you thought both of them were right, but that Caesar and Ndlovu had a distinct advantage over Liz Gunner. Okay, and you said that, for many of you said that because he was Zulu and he was male. And that is probably very much in his benefit, okay? Because he would have seen things that Liz Gunner would not have seen, or that somebody who saw them and was translating for Liz Gunner may have left out or deliberately not told her so as to protect the identity of the Zulu performers or their cultural identity. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So sometimes when two different people look at the same thing, they find very different qualities in that thing, which may look as though they are opposites. In this case, we're looking at estratomia. It's the same thing. It's a genre. Everybody is looking at the same thing. But these two people see different parts of that same thing. It's like, let's say I'm sitting at this side of the camera and you are sitting at the other side of the camera. When you see me holding up my finger here, you will see that side of my finger. I'm looking at it from this side. If I describe my finger from this side, I'm correct. If you describe my finger from that side, you are correct, even though the description that we come up with is going to be different. Okay, so sometimes when we look at something, two people, because of their different circumstances, will see the same thing very differently. Does that mean that they are wrong?
No.
Tamia says no. Do you think it does everybody feel that way? Or does somebody in our class think that maybe one is right and one is wrong?
So it's like you said with your finger, even though you're looking at that side, you're still right. And I'm looking at the other side of the finger, I'm still right. So yes, I still feel that they're both right. Because even though the genre, it's one genre, they're both looking at a different point of view, but it's their points of view.
Yes. Okay, so they're looking at it from different points of view. So what I'm trying to, thank you. What I'm trying to establish for you so that you can see this is that sometimes in our world, we are tempted to think that there is one correct answer and one wrong answer. But actually, in the real world that we live in, there is very seldom a one answer that is correct and one answer that is wrong. Usually, in our real world, because we all look at things from different perspectives, we see things from a multiple, we see truths from very many different perspectives. So truth seems to be much more flexible than, say, one particular thing. And you'll see that, for example, when you look at South African culture. South African culture is very difficult to speak about South African culture because, as we've seen in just this one genre, there are many things that contribute to South African culture because we are such a diverse people. So it's inevitable that we will look at things from different perspectives. And you just need to look at politics to see that, okay? There might be dominant politics, but there are also many other political voices around that all see the way that things happen very differently. I'll give you an example. In today's world, democracy is considered a very important aspect of governing a country well. Okay, so we are democracy in South Africa. The United Kingdom is a democracy. Germany is a democracy. Australia is a democracy. Botswana is a democracy. Namibia is a democracy. So wherever you go in the world, you'll find democracies. Not everywhere, but in many places you'll find democracies. And there is a great deal of pressure on countries that aren't using democratic systems to become democratic. Okay, so you'll find that some countries, for example, pretend to be democratic so that they can conform and look good from the outside. Okay, I'm sure you will be aware of that, that in many countries, not just in Africa, but all over the world, elections are fraudulent so that one person wins in favor of the others. People are forced to vote in a particular way, and so on and so forth. Okay. If you were watching the news recently, will know that Russia has just had an election where many people said that the result was a complete sham because none of the opposition parties were allowed to participate. So imagine if you say no opposition parties can participate, but you can all vote. Well, at the top is going to win. Okay, so you see how it can. People can try and pretend that there's a democracy, but there isn't. Okay. Now, democracy is, on paper, a very good system because it allows for everybody to have their say. But we all know that democracy is not perfect, and it doesn't work. It can be manipulated. Okay, it can be pushed into certain things to make certain people wealthy and so on and so forth. But one of the things about democracy, which is interesting, is that people from a European or Western perspective look at democracy very differently from those who come from a traditionalist African perspective. Okay, and there are reasons for that, many good and varied reasons. Both of them look at democracy and they see something different. And they see the outplaying of democracy very differently. And that's why you'll see in South Africa, but in other places where there are lots of different people with different cultures, they will contest things very loudly and violently because they believe that what they think democracy is the only way that democracy can function. Okay? That is why our politics in South Africa is so very interesting and exciting and sometimes a bit scary, because many of us look at democracy from different perspectives. What one person thinks is corruption, other people may not consider corruption. What some people consider a democratic election, other people may not see as a democratic election. What some people may see as peaceful protesting, others may not see as peaceful protesting. Do you see what I'm saying? Is one person with their view wrong because they look at something differently from the dominant part of the culture? They probably aren't wrong. They're probably just seeing it from a different perspective. And when in the academic world, when we are looking at sources, when we are looking at interviews, when we are looking at what people do and commenting about it, we are trying to find as much about the truth of a situation as possible. So we're trying to hear every different perspective and draw them together to see what the truth might be. We're a bit like detectives. We're trying to work out what's going on here. Why does it work this way? Why does it look this way? Why does it sound this way? Why do people do the things that they do? And we'll look at what people say about it, and then we can come to a sort of a balanced conclusion of what it might be. That's what academia is about. And that's what your essay at the end of the semester is about. It's about saying, look, here's Istratamia, and Istratamia is sung by men. Some people think that Istratamia is deeply rooted in the Zulu tradition of dancing, war drills, and masculinity, dominant masculinity of showing off and competing. Other people think that the texts and some of the movements of Istratamia demonstrate a much softer side of men. And the two are both probably true for different people and at different times. Okay. Consider another thing that we'll look at. Ndlovu wrote in 1996, as I said, only 2 years after we transitioned into a new age of democracy. So the legacy of apartheid was still so very strong then. Not as strong as it, I mean, nowadays, the legacy of apartheid is still with us, but it's not as strong as it was immediately after the democratic change in 1994. So a Zulu man like Ndlovu would be very much influenced by the way that Zulus were reacting against apartheid, reacting against the domination of white people. And so it is inevitable, I think at least, that the expressions of music and of culture, particularly for men who had been taken away from their families and forced to work for very little money by the white people, of course it would be violent. One can expect that and understand that, okay? On the other hand, 20 years later, when Liz Gunner looks at Isicathamiya, when that idea of white domination is still around, but not quite as much, and when ideas of blacks dominating blacks themselves and sometimes oppressing them is even stronger, and add to that HIV and AIDS, add to that TB, add to that poverty, and what do you get? You get a very different interpretation and musical expression. So when you look at a phenomenon like Isicathamiya at different times in its history, because it is something that embodies culture, it is almost always going to happen that it will represent what's happening in people's minds at that time. Now, most of you are too young to remember what it was like between 1990 and about 1998. Particularly here in KwaZulu-Natal, just before 1994, it was almost like civil war here in KwaZulu-Natal, okay? And it wasn't just white against black, it was often IFP against ANC. So there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of violence, there was a lot of killing, a lot of political killing. That still goes on today, but not to quite as greater extent, okay? Now imagine that, if that's happening every day, it is inevitable that that will come out in the way that you make music. Make sense to you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, I'm telling you all of this because when you write your essay, these are the kind of things that you need to draw on. Why is Isicathamiya for Ndlovu something masculine, strong, and embodying Zulu strong masculinity? But for somebody like Liz Gunner, Isicathamiya is a softer side of Zulu masculinity. When you ask those two questions of the same thing, we have to find what are the things that draw us out to that. And for example, both of them conduct interviews, but they conduct interviews with different types of people. Ndlovu conducts interviews with older men. If you look at his thesis, you will have noticed that the people that he interviews are already old. They were singing Isicathamiya in the 50s and the 60s, some of them even in the 1940s. That was a very long time ago, okay, at the height of apartheid. Liz Gunner also uses interviews, but she was looking at people who were singing Isicathamiya in 2012 and 2013. So you can see that there's a big gap of time in between those two things, okay? And culture changes all the time. So that gives us already a clue as to why masculinity and Zulu masculinity in particular looks so very different at different times in our history, okay? Now that discussion was just to get us going about thinking about these two papers. They're fascinating. I find them very interesting. And I think some of you are beginning to see that they can be very interesting. I saw in some of your work that you are picking out some of the important differences between the two authors and why they might see things differently. That's incredibly important and very good, okay? You're on the right track. You're being a detective. You're looking for the clues. when you write an academic essay, you are looking for clues to give you the answer for your essay. And once you've found those clues, it's like evidence. You use the evidence to give you a conclusion. Think of yourself also like a lawyer. You are looking for evidence, or a detective, let's say. You are looking for evidence for a crime. You want to see, why did this crime happen? You look for all the bits and pieces of evidence. And once you've found that evidence, you present it to the court. You say, here is evidence piece 1, here is evidence piece 2, and here is evidence piece 3. This is what evidence piece 1 is and why it is linked to this case. Here is what evidence piece 2 is and why it is linked to the case. And here is evidence piece 3 and why it is linked to this case. When we look at all 3 of these pieces of evidence together, our conclusion is blah, blah, blah. That's what academia is about. It's a treasure hunt, looking for evidence, assessing the evidence, and then saying why that evidence has brought you to the conclusion that you have. All right. Now, there are important things that you have to learn along the way about how to present evidence in an academic way. And so I'm going to show you some of the model answers now, because I see that there are some issues with citation, which are important for us to clear up. Just tell me when you can see the screen. Okay. I want to look at this first question here. Create the full bibliographic entry for this journal article. Many of you are getting this kind of thing incorrect. So the first clue that we have is that this is a journal article. A journal article has a very specific way of being put into a bibliography. Okay. It starts, like all bibliographical entries, with the person's name. First, we have the surname, then a comma, and then their first name. Now that happens in every bibliographic entry. Okay, surname, comma, first name. It's not first name, comma, surname. It's always surname, comma, first name. Now, depending on what kind of citation method or bibliographic method you are using, the next thing to come is the date. Sometimes the date comes at the very end, but in this particular system, which I'm showing you, it comes directly after the name. Okay. Now, where would you have found this in the article? Let me just get a picture of the article up for you so that you can see where I found all the information for what we're doing. So, sorry, I just need to find it on my computer quickly. Where did I put it? The trick is to find it. Okay, let's see. I'm going to have to show you a different one so that you can see how we do this. This is another article by Liz Gunner, and I'm just going to show it to you quickly so that you can see where to look for the clues of what you need. All right. Here is the front page of another article by Liz Gunner. Okay. Here is the title of the article. There's Liz Gunner's name. And if you look at the top here, here are some other very interesting parts of information which we need. So we're going to use this information, we're going to use that information, and we're going to use this information. Liz Gunner is the name. So we're going to use Gunner, her surname first, comma, Liz. Who can tell me where the date is? Where do I find the date for just after Liz Gunner's name? Can you see the date on this page?
Yes, and we can see the date on the top. Yeah, September 2008.
2008. Okay, good. We don't need to use the September part. We just need to use 2008. Okay, that would be in brackets. The next thing we do is we add the title. Okay, and for a journal article, the title always needs to be in inverted commas. I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. Okay, after the title, we have to find the name of the journal. Remember, this is a journal article, so it comes out of a journal. Okay, the journal in this case is called Social Dynamics. If we went to the top of the of this article, you'll see that you get a picture of the journal. There's the full name of it. Okay, so we can see that this is the journal that we're dealing with. Okay, then just underneath here, it tells us that it's volume 34, and that's the second issue of that volume. That will come after the title of the journal. Okay, and then after that, we have the page numbers. So let me put that all into a bibliography for you so that you can see it. I'm going to open a new page for you, so a fresh page, so you can see how I do this. Let me just stop sharing for a minute. I'm going to open up a new Word document, and we're going to do it so you can see. Let me share this blank page with you. Tell me when you can see the blank page.
Yes, so we can see it.
All right. So the first thing we do is we put Dana Liz. Okay. The date of that article, I don't know if you remember, is 2008. Now, do you notice that there's no full stop over there? Can you see there's no full stop? I put the full stop after the bracket like that. You see that?
Yes.
There is a version of this where you don't need to say the person's full name. You can just use their initials. Who knows what initials are?
The first letter of your name.
Right. So if you're using that, instead of Liz, you just write L, full stop. You put a full stop there, and you put a full stop there if you're using initials only. But if you're using her name completely, you don't put a full stop after the name. You just put it after the date. Okay? Now, here is the important thing about journal articles. It must have that over there, the opening part of the, they're called inverted commas, okay? Now, our next thing is to look at what the title of that thing was. So I'm just going to get the title. I'm just copying it now, and I'm going to paste it in there. And I'm just going to make it the same font as everything else. There we go. All right, so here is the title. Now, we always use in a bibliography something called title case. And you may remember that I showed you a little app where you can add this into title case, and it will capitalize all the right letters for you. Okay, if we put it into that app, it would have done this for us. It would have put capital letters in front of textualities, eschatomia, reciprocities, voice, and streets. Okay, the way that's put there is called title case. At the end of the title, you close the inverted commas and you put a full stop. Right, now we need to add the journal name, and it's called Social Dynamics. Now, the journal's name is a bit like the way that we put a book's name. Because a journal is a type of book, the journal's name goes in italics. So it's skewed like this, okay? So we call it Social Dynamics. After the title, we put a comma. Then vol for volume. And the volume was 34. And then no for number. Was number 2. And then we use this thing here, a colon, and we put the page numbers. And the page numbers are 156 to 173. And then we put a full stop. That is the way to do a journal article. So let's just have a look at the one that you had to do. Find it quickly. Let's have a look. Here it says, Gunnar, Liz, 2014, full stop. Opening of the double inverted commas. Now here I've made a mistake, by the way. What's the mistake here? Can anybody find it? In the title.
It's having a lower capital M.
Yes,
Like
this should be a capital M like that, okay? Good. Was that Mpilo that answered that?
Yes, sir.
Well done. Okay, so here is the correct version of the title, okay? And then we put it in closed inverted commas, and then we put the full stop. Then Journal of Southern African Studies must go in italics, followed by comma, then volume was 40, num 2, then we have a colon and the page numbers. After the page numbers, a full stop. Now I'm going to find another journal article for us to look at to see if we can do it together. If we can name it together. So let me just find it quickly. All right, I'm going to share something with you now. This is the front page of a journal article about church music. And so here's the front page. Of the journal article. Here's the title of the article. And this is the person that wrote it, Dennis Arnold, okay? Right, and there's the first page, page 66. Now, if we go all the way to the top, to this title page, it gives us all that information again. Vivaldi's Church Music and Introduction, that's the title. Author, Dennis Arnold. The source, that means where it comes from, early music. Do you see? That's the name of the journal article. Okay, there's the volume, there's the number. It's published in 1973, and there are the page numbers. Do you notice that we don't include the publisher when we are using a journal article. You only use the publisher for a book, not for a journal article. So with all of this information, who can tell me what would we need to put first for the entry for this particular one? What would need to come first?
It's author's surname and name.
Yes, in this case, we'd have to start Arnold, comma, Dennis. What would come after Dennis?
A year.
Date.
Yes, 1973, and we would put it into brackets. Okay. What comes after that?
Title.
Title. Yes, and the title needs to be in inverted commas, right? Then what needs to come next?
Subtitle.
Well, yes, the subtitle. After the subtitle,
The source.
yes, the name of the journal, Early Music. Then comes volume 1, number 2, and finally the page number. So let me now do it for you so you can see what it would look like. Let me share the screen with you again. Arnold, that was his surname, Dennis. It was written in 1973. We have to put full stop. We open the inverted commas. Vivaldi's Church Music is the first part of the title. Here's the subtitle and introduction. That's the whole title. So we put the closed inverted commas. We put a full stop. The name of the journal, Early Music, comma, vol, let me just check what volume it was. Volume number 1. So let's just get back to here. 1, number 2, and the page numbers 66 to 74. 66 to 74, full stop. Now, when you are putting together a bibliography is always in alphabetical order of the surnames of the authors. So we have Gunnar and Arnold. Those are the two that we've got so far. Which one should come first if it's going to be in alphabetical order?
Arnold.
Yes. So we select this and we put it at the top. Now it's correct. A is first, G comes after that, okay? So it's according to the people's surname. Any questions about that so far? You okay with it?
Yes, sir.
Good. All right. Now let's look at the third assessment. The model answers for the third assessment. Let me just find it to share with you. Model answers. I think this is the one. Okay, here we go. Now, the Caesar and Ndlovu source was not a journal article. What was it? Was it a book? A thesis, correct. Okay. So a thesis is treated almost like a book. There's just one difference. So we start again with the person's surname. Comma, first name, Caesar. Date, 1996, full stop. The title of the thesis is in italics, full stop. And here's where the change comes. Now, for a normal book, we would usually put the city of publication and the publisher, and then it would be the end. But for a thesis, we tell the reader what kind of thesis this is. This is a PhD thesis. Sometimes you get a master's thesis, okay? So this is a PhD thesis. Then you have colon, Rhodes University, the university from which that thesis comes. Full stop. Okay. Any questions so far? Now, I want to show you about citation. Let's have a look at this question D. In 4 or 5 sentences, discuss the American and traditional influences on eschatomia. What does the word hybrid mean? Ndlovu says that eschatomia is a genre developed out of traditional Zulu music and dance, and Ghana says that today it is independent of traditional culture. How did a genre, which has its roots in traditional Zulu music, develop into something which is a hybrid style, neither Zulu nor Western? Now, I want to show you how I went about answering this question. There may be American influences in the eschatomia genre. If you read both of those articles carefully, you will see that they are not exactly sure if they are American influences, but they think that there are American influences. Do you see that I said here, there may be American influences? I didn't say there are American influences. I say there may be, or I could have said there are probably American influences. Do you see the differences there? Okay. And then I say here, one theory is that minstrel groups which toured South Africa at the end of the 1800s inspired Black people in Natal to imitate the popular style. Now, I wasn't quoting there, but I got all of that information from Ndlovu's thesis from page 52 to page 55. So I must say where I got that from. I put Ndlovu's name, then the date, a comma, and the page numbers from where I got that information. Now, when you are in the same paragraph, and only when you are in the same paragraph, and you are talking about the same source, every time you quote from that source or you paraphrase from that source, you need only put the page number. So look here. American influences have been discerned in the use of the banjo as an accompanying instrument. And I tell everybody which page I found that information on. Also, the American style dress code. So what they wore, that was on page 55. The dance steps, page 57. And ragtime rhythms, that was on page 61 and 62. Okay, so even though I'm listing all sorts, you'll see that I've put the page numbers to show where I found each of those pieces of information. Then there are also traditional influences. So here I've listed all of the traditional influences which may have influenced Isicathamiya, and I say on which page I found that, page 66. And from Zulu culture, wedding songs, amahubo, and so on, and the war dances, that was from page 66 to 68. I've told the reader exactly where I got that information, all the way through from here, all the way to the end of that paragraph. I've demonstrated exactly where each of the pieces of information comes from. The second part of the question says, what does hybrid mean? I've said here, hybrid is something created when two different things come together. When two different species of dog are mated together, the resulting calf is a hybrid. Okay. So, sorry, that should be puppy, a resulting puppy, not a calf. I must have been thinking about cows at that time. Okay. Then the next part of the question says, how did a genre which had its roots in traditional Zulu music develop into something which is a hybrid style? I say Isicathamiya is probably a hybrid because the city itself is a hybrid. Think about that. A city is where lots of people come together. Okay, so it's a hybrid of cultures brought together artificially. A city isn't a place that happens naturally. It's artificially. Think of Joburg. All of the mine workers were brought in from KwaZulu-Natal. They didn't live in Johannesburg before. They were brought into Johannesburg to help with the mines. Okay, so that's artificial. It didn't happen naturally. The interacting cultures results in hybridities. That's just another way of saying hybridities. Okay. Then look here. In chapter 2, Ndlovu speaks about the possible influences from Zulu war culture. What are these influences? And I say what Ndlovu says, and then look, I put exactly where I found that. Ndlovu, 1996, from page 68 to page 70. Okay, so all the way through here, I've done that over and over again, except where I've been asked to give my own opinion. When I'm giving my own opinion, I'm obviously not drawing it from the book or from Liz Gunner's work. I'm drawing it from my own understanding. But when I'm drawing from the thesis or when I'm drawing from Liz Gunner's article, I must say where it comes from, even if I've put it in my own words. And I've used my own words mostly here, okay, in these answers, except right here at the top. Let's see, where did I? Actually, I've used my own words all the way through. Let's have a look if I've used quotes in the other one. Let's see. Here we go. The author, Liz Gunner. So here, the author, it's Gunner 2014, page 348. And here is the quote. So I'm using the exact words that she used. First, I open the quotes, then I add the quote in, and then at the end, I close the quotes. Okay. But I still have to put where it came from. All right. Are there any questions about that so far?
No, sir. You just clarified my question regarding the quoting and still adding the citation.
Okay. So whether you are quoting or whether you are paraphrasing, you put a citation. Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Good. All right. Are there any final questions from you before we finish this class? I see a whole lot of people have already left. So are there any questions before we finish for today? I hope that what we've done today has helped to clarify things for you that maybe they weren't as clear as before. If you have questions that arise after having looked at the comments that I've provided on your worksheets or your assessments, then please let me know. I just want to show you one last thing because some of you are asking me about this. Let me just find an example. Pilo, can I just please show the students your just a tiny your assessment so that I can show people how to access the comments that I make. They won't see your mark, so don't worry. Let me just try and get this right. Okay. All right. Thank you. I'm going to share this quickly with you. Just find it now. When you open it, you will see probably what looks like this, okay, with these little comments over here, okay? If you want to see the comments, you can click on it like that, and it will show you the comment, or you can go up to the top of the page here. Do you see where it says simple markup here? If you click on that little arrow and you select all markup, now you will see everything that I've done. So you'll see here where I've added an S, where I've added some words and taken things out, but you'll also see all of my comments. Okay, so you just go up to the top here. Oh, you'll have to select, by the way, review. So you select review, then you look for all markup instead of, usually it's on simple markup, just like that. And you select all markup, then you will be able to see everything. Okay. All right, I think that's everything for today. Thank you, Cele and Pilo, for allowing us to use your essay as an example. I appreciate that. I hope that you all have a lovely day and that you enjoy the rest of this week. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. I'll post this up on YouTube later today so that you can access it if you want to see it again.
Thank you, sir.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thank
Sure.